Welcome to Longevity by Design, a podcast designed to give individuals access to the leading scientific information in the field of longevity. The ability to add years to your life and life to your years needs no opinion. Join us as we ask science to take the wheel. In each episode, Dr. Gil Blander joins a co-host and an industry expert in the field of longevity, shining a light and getting the answers to the key question: how can we live a longer, healthier life?
Hello, I'm Ashley Reaver, and I'm joined by Dr. Gil Blander. Welcome to Longevity by Design, How to Live a Longer, Healthier Life. We're produced by Insight Tracker, your science-based guide to optimizing your body from the inside out. Our guest today is Dr. Roger Fielding. Dr. Fielding is the Associate Director of the Jean Meyer USDA Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging at Tufts University. He also serves as leader and senior scientist of the Nutrition, Exercise Physiology, and Sarcopenia team. Dr. Fielding's research interests include the impact of exercise and physical activity on successful aging, skeletal muscle alterations with advancing age in disabled and non-disabled populations, age-related alterations in the control of skeletal muscle protein turnover. A lot of good things to dig into today. Thank you so much for being here.
So, Roger, we know each other for a very long time, maybe a decade, maybe longer. And I never ask you about your background, so I will take this opportunity and ask you about your career path and what inspired you to become a scientist.
Opportunity to reflect a little bit on this last week at this international Sarcopenia that I helped to run. We bestowed the Lifetime Achievement Award to my mentor, Bill Evans, who I think you've met before. Well, and the story goes is that I was an undergraduate at Boston University about 1980 and took a class with Dr. Evans on physiology. And he was talking about all these great things about skeletal muscle and muscle fiber types and adaptations to exercise training. And while I had always been interested in science and biology a little bit, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. But when I met him, what he was interested in just seemed so cool and resonated so much with me that, he suggested that I want school where he had trained, which was at Ball State University in Indiana. So I went out there after I graduated from BU for a couple of years and got a lot of experience in studying exercise training and exercise really of young athletes, swimmers, runners, triathletes, about how to do studies to study exercise capacity and skeletal muscle metabolism. And then when I finished my master's degree, I actually took a job back at Tufts where Bill Evans had sort of ended up. I think I worked for about 4 years. And that was the time when he really focused his work on trying to understand the age-related changes in skeletal muscle and exercise capacity and what role nutrition and exercise played in those processes. And, I was reflecting on this when we were bestowing the award on Bill. It's easy to forget that there was very little research on aging and older people in the 1980s. And older people were largely ignored by society and by medicine, and really were just a problem to our healthcare system. And at that time, I got to work with Bill when very exciting things were going on in his laboratory about trying to understand how older people's physical functioning and exercise really be influenced by nutrition and by physical activity. And I'm very, very grateful for those experiences. I went on and did my PhD with him at Tufts. Then I migrated over to Boston University, where I became a faculty member and established my own laboratory and was there for 11 years. And then was really fortunate to be recruited back to the Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging at Tufts in about 2004, and really was able to sort of move my career forward We've done a lot of really exciting things since then at Tufts, at the HNRCA, and it's just that's really how it got started, really into the right classroom. And I think everybody has that kind of story where the person that is teaching the class or that you meet in the university, really something they're doing resonates with you. And it certainly resonated with me. And here we are 40 plus years later, still doing things that I really love and really enjoy, and still feel like we have a lot to learn about aging and how people's physical function changes with age and how nutrition and physical activity can influence that.
That's awesome. Dr. Evans was one of our guests on season 1 of the podcast, and it's still one of my favorite episodes that we've done. He is a colleague at UC Berkeley in the nutrition department, and he teaches 2 or 3 classes to our intro nutrition students. And I just want to shake him and be like, you don't know how lucky you are. People pay so much money to hear this man talk.
Last week, and it was really a nice event for Bill and his family too. So
he was great. Well, diving in, let's start with some basics. Can you describe how the body builds muscle?
Different ways, because muscle is very responsive to a couple of factors that are always kind of sort of around. There are factors. So what we eat, we have to have an adequate supply of protein, and more particularly, we have to have an adequate supply of the building blocks of protein that we get from eating protein in our diets. The amino acids and primarily amino acids. They're the amino acids that our bodies don't have the capability to produce themselves. So nutrition is important. Also, energy we eat in our diet is also important. So we have to eat enough calories to really muscle. There are several circulating hormones that circulate in the bloodstream in our bodies that are what we call pro-anabolic or pro-myogenic, that stimulate muscles to grow and get bigger. Ones that everybody knows about are things like testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. These are the anabolic hormones that are the male sex steroids. But even some of the female reproductive hormones, like diol particularly, also stimulate muscle to grow. So these reproductive hormones, besides their role in the reproductive process, are also important for muscular development. And we also have some in our body, or cytokines in our body, that can counteract the effects of the pro-myogenic hormones, estrogen and testosterone. These are the cytokines that are more catabolic, like interleukin 6, interleukin 1 beta, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and some of the other pro-inflammatories that activate the breakdown of protein in muscle. And there's always this sort of balance between these hormones. And then, most importantly, muscle, just like our bone, responds a lot to the loading conditions that we put it under. So if we're in sort of earthbound gravity here, there's a lot of loading on the muscle that stimulates the muscle to grow. If we go up into space, like in the International Space Station, where there's zero gravity, those loading conditions are all taken away, and we have atrophy of the muscle, or the muscle size starts to decrease and shrinks. If we start a program of resistance training or strength training exercises, we can induce a pretty robust increase in skeletal muscle growth. So the size of the muscle groups that are training will actually increase. And if we look down under the microscope about the actual cross-sectional areas of those muscle fibers or muscle cells actually increase in diameter. So the individual cells get bigger. And conversely, if we have an injury or we do too much physical activity, or let's say we fracture our right leg and we get put in a cast, very quickly those muscles that are in the cast will also undergo a similar type of atrophy as we see during space flight. So muscle responds to all those sort of different stimuli or conditions.
So, Roger, you described very nicely building and breaking muscle. The question that I'm wondering about is, what is the mechanism of muscle breakdown? How it's happening that our muscles
Yeah, well,
start
there are
to
some
decay?
in the muscle cells. There are some very tightly regulated signal ways that will activate a very complex cascade of enzymes. These are molecules that are proteins that are designed to kind of attach to large muscle proteins and actually start pulling them apart and breaking them down. These are sort of what are called, and they are also involved in this very small ubiquitin. These are these ubiquitin ligase proteins. And there are several of these that are specific skeletal muscle. They are activated by a number of factors, some of which I already described, like the pro-inflammatory cytokines and other factors in muscle. And these ubiquitin ligases, in a very organized way, actually begin the process of breaking down the skeletal muscle fibers, and correspondingly, the actual amount of contractile machinery within the muscles, the proteins that actually generate force, start to decline. And the cross-sectional area, or the size of the muscles, will also shrink or decrease in size.
And specifically related to your expertise of sarcopenia, can you explain, how muscle breakdown relates to sarcopenia, and the other factors that are usually present as well?
Many syndromes of advancing age, like frailty, dementia, other syndromes and diseases, isn't just by one factor. So if you think about all those things that I talked about that affect sort of muscle growth and muscle loss, many of the age, we know that the promyogenicals, estrogen, testosterone, DHA, insulin-like growth factor 1, all start to decline with advancing age. We know that there are changes in the sort of loading conditions that the muscle experiences. People become less active as they age. That influences protein breakdown. There's this rise in the pro-inflammatory cytokine molecules, sometimes this inflammaging, if you will, that can cause muscle protein breakdown. But there are changes to both the quality and the quantity of the diet that also can influence these processes. So again, it's many of the same factors changing with age that regulate not only the degradation of proteins or skeletons in muscle, but also probably influence how much skeletal protein as well. So it's really disrupting balance of protein synthesis and protein degradation.
Are there subpopulations that are at a greater risk of age-related muscle loss? Certainly it can happen to everyone as we age, but are there some people that are much more susceptible?
What happens is that of muscle loss that people experience can vary. It's influenced by what the gains in muscle mass are, the peak gains in muscle mass are during growth and development and use, and then what the rate of loss is to that. And what we do know is that and insults like hospitalizations, infectious disease, comorbidities can cause either a chronic or kind of an acute acceleration of this muscle loss, so that the person either over has a more rapid loss, or they have these sort of intermittent insults that cause them to lose muscle that they never quite recover from, so that their rate of loss over time is accelerated. And what I think is really important, the reason muscle loss is so important is that at a certain level, at a certain point, you will reach a point that you lose so much muscle that your ability to perform activities of daily living, walking, getting up out of a chair, getting out of bed, climbing stairs, will start to become affected negatively. And those rates are different in different reasons. But once you get to that point, that's when it really can start, the muscle loss can really start to affect function in your own environment, and really can become sort of a barrier lifestyle.
So Roger, that's interesting. And my follow-up question is, how can we measure our physical function? Are there specific essay or specific tests that we can do, like I can do after the podcast to be sure what is my physical decline
So
level?
measuring muscle mass done. There are very good imaging tech can do in the laboratory or in the hospital. There's some really new techniques that, in fact, Dr. Evans is pioneering, where you can use a very simple single dose of a radioisotope and measure that isotope in a spot urine. It's a very good direct measure of muscle mass. But aside from those things, what you can do is we can actually measure how strong you are by measuring your grip strength. That's a very good prognostic indicator of late life disability, falls, fractures, and mortality. Grip strength, very simple test. We can also do tests of function, like just simply measuring how fast you can walk across a very short course at your sort of normal walking speed. And it turns out that normal walking speed is a very strong predictor of mortality, of risk of falling, and other sort of bad clinical outcomes. So there are ways to do this pretty simply, I would say.
So Roger, I'm a very fast walker, so I feel very good about that.
So you're likely to live a long time. So that's great.
I hope that the correlation will stay.
Yeah, no, it's a very strong relationship, and it's really held up across a lot of these are observational studies, so we will follow them for a long time, measure their walking speed, and then see what happens to them. What we still don't know is if you have somebody that has a slow walking speed, for example, if you intervene with an exercise intervention or a therapy or a nutritional intervention, if you can improve walking speed, will that really be of sort of greater mortality or reduced risk of falling or other measures? So we're still learning a little bit about that. Some of the signals suggest that yes, if you improve someone's walking speed with an exercise intervention, it can help them. It can prevent them from being affects their mortality or some of their long-term outcomes. We still really don't know exactly, but it takes very large follow people for a long time to really do that.
And then Roger, what is the explanation for the grip strength? Why that's correlate with longevity?
Yeah, it's a good question. There is evidence that grips correlates very well with strength, for example, in the lower extremity. The reason grip strength is so pervasive is that it's a simple test, and in fact, it's been in many, many large epidemiological cohort studies. So we have a lot of data from a lot of people on grip strength. Are more complicated to perform. And if you look across all of the epidemiological cohort studies that have been conducted worldwide, everybody measures lower extremity strength a little bit differently. So it's very hard for cross comparisons or when you want to pool analyses to really see what's going on for some of these kinds of outcomes. So we have grip strength in a lot of people. It does appear to be linked to overall whole body muscle strength. Yeah, you're right. This is a very small muscle group in the hand. But that's the data we have now.
Sounds like we have a lot of work to do to understand everything, which is everywhere in science.
I think so. Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, I know we haven't talked about pro-inflammatory cytokine. Individuals that have high serum interleukin-6 levels tend to lose their walking speed faster.
It bodes well for people that live in cities in the Northeast where walking speed is a point of contention, because if you are slow on those sidewalks, they will let you know.
Yeah, and I also think there's all these issues about car and drive down. Sort of conduct
Absolutely.
lives.
And something you mentioned earlier, I had thought about before, but muscle mass,
peak muscle
having an influence on your
likelihood of developing sarcopenia. We talk about that a lot when it comes to your bone mineral density,
and osteopenia and
osteoporosis. But can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really goes back even before birth, and probably there are and a host of these sort of phenotypic, body composition changes that occur. We know that body adiposity, fatness is determined by a lot of these things, bone mineral density, and it's equally true. Muscle accumulation during growth and development is influenced by many of these same factors. We also know, for example, that many of the same both pro and anti-anemic factors are very similar, but that act the same ways in bone and muscle. So that is, there's really good data from several of the large studies that, just like peak bone mass, osteoporosis later in life, peak strength really determines who gets weakness later in life. And I guess when you think about it, probably, and as we learn more about the epigenetics of these traits or phenotypes and how they're influenced by development, but then maybe also by environmental exposures, I think we can unravel this, and those are really exciting. I think, biomarkers for what we see much later in life as well.
Yeah, one very good point that you mentioned, that you said basically muscle loss or aging start from the day that you have been born. I think that that's a very good message for our audience. So aging doesn't start at the age of 65 or 70. We start much earlier, and especially for muscle, you should take care of your body from a very early age, and don't leave it to the age of 70. It will be too late.
Absolutely, Gil. I couldn't more. When I first started studying sort of aging and muscle and aging and exercise, when our studies, people that volunteer in our research studies had, particularly the women, many of the men as well, had no experience with exercise and physical activity before in their lives. They went to school, they worked, they raised their families, and when they retired, retirement was really a time to just relax and not do anything. They had no concept of exercise training or physical activity in their lives. And I think we know so much more about the health benefits of exercise and also nutrition. And I think many more people realize this. We have wonderful developments that are legislated. We have Title IX that allows for equal sports access, activity access for males and females and girls very early in school. So both men and women have a lot more exposure to exercise and physical activity throughout their life. And that's really important. And I think we really can't put in the situation where we worry or about becoming more physically active when we get older. This is a lifelong process, and I think a lifelong commitment. And yes, you can benefit and you can improve your physical fitness and your health and your physical performance and functioning. If you've never done any exercise and you get to be 65 years of age and you say, hey, I want to start, yes, you can still improve. Yes, you can reap the benefits of physical activity, but you will never reach the level that you will achieve if you are physically active and have tried to maintain that across your. And I think that is an important message. It's never too late to start, but you're always going to be better, and you maintained it. Maybe you have to take a little break or cut back a little bit when you're working or when you're raising your family, but don't stop. It's a really important health behavior that we really want to continue. And, I know some people don't like to exercise. I personally like to exercise and physical activity into their lives that they like.
Yeah, and I can testify for that. One day I had a meeting with Roger, and I've seen him coming to the office sweaty, and he said, hey, I just finished a run. So I can testify that Roger is an avid runner.
I don't know if I'm avid. I like to run. I don't very far. I'm slow, but I still like to go. I really enjoy exercising, and it's allowed me to do what I wanted to do.
And as far as specific, is there an amount of activity that is associated with, certainly there's a lot of factors that go into it, but is there a minimum that everyone should try and strive for to prevent that muscle atrophy associated with aging?
Yeah, so 15 years ago now, Department of Health engaged the scientific community to develop guidelines for physical activity. We have the dietary guidelines for health, but we had never had nationally endorsed guidelines for physical activity. We have those now, and we're probably in the second or third. But they're pretty clear that there are numerous health benefits of exercise activity. One doesn't fit trying to achieve, for optimum benefits, trying to achieve 350 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity per week. And there are numerous ways that you can get moderate to vigorous activity. There's lots of things. It's not going to include things like walking, gardening, heavy housework, working in your yard, those sort of things. But it's 350 minutes a week. And specifically for older adults, they also say included in that you should get 1 to 2 sessions per week of resistance exercise training or strength training exercises, because we know that older people, as they age, lose muscle mass and muscle strength and can bring sarcopenia. So the guidelines are, but for older people, they are a bit more specific. We talk about strength training exercise important.
So Roger, I'm surprised by that, because it's mean like almost an hour a day that you need to exercise. And what I heard in the news is like 30 minutes a few times a week. So that sounds like it's much higher than what we heard.
Those are the optimal guidelines for optimal benefit. What I tell people is some with just walking, and you will reap some health benefits from that. But if you want to get the optimal benefits, you need to strive towards those recommended physical activity guidelines.
And from your research, in your opinion, what is, if you have to rank the exercise by the best to the second best and so on, what will be the most beneficial exercise to do?
Well, we always recommend that people do some amount of aerobic exercise. A lot of cardiorespiratory, cardiovascular benefits from those things. There are numerous studies suggesting that the health risk is reduced different ways. And when we talk about resistance training, there are numerous ways to do resistance training. Some people who are not familiar with it might want to engage a personal trainer. They might want to join a fitness center where they can at least get some instruction exercises that involve the large muscle groups of both the upper extremity, the arms, and the lower extremities, the leg. Many people think that, and I think it's important to think about getting exercises for the core muscles in the abdominal, the lower pelvis, using simple leg weights to get up and out of. There are simple exercises that people can do in their home if they desire. The YMCA in your community is a source of programming around physical activity, whether it's conditioning or strengthening or even other things. So there's lots of different ways to get the required amounts of, but again, I think it people's access and their preference, what they want to do, what they think they would like to do. Some people love to go to the gym, love the social. So it depends, I'd rather work out with my free weights at home and sort of make up my little exercise routine that I can do rather than the gym, but other people really like the gym. So I think personal preference is important here. Whatever it is that you're going to do and you're going to adopt and do regularly is the most important thing. The thing that we find is that the benefits of exercise are real, they're substantial, but if you don't continue, the exercise go away. So anything you can do to promote adherence, if you like exercise with your spouse or with a friend or a partner, that can be a good way to promote adherence and accountability. So you'll go do your walk or you'll go running because you're going to be meeting your friend or your partner there, and it sort of convinces you to go and do that exercise or that physically on that day. So these are all important sort of behavioral techniques that you can use to help you sustain and promote activity.
Awesome tips. And I think when people hear you should exercise more, it's often like, oh, yeah, I know. But there is a massive amount of science behind all of these recommendations. They didn't just get plucked out of the sky.
And some make a difference between whether someone wants to engage or doesn't want to engage in physical activity. So they can be really very useful. Other things that we do are things related to goal setting. People have a goal that they have in mind, like maybe they're going on a canoe trip, or they're going on a camping trip or a hiking trip, like they're really quite up to doing the hikes, every day for a week. Setting a goal and then figuring out what kind of physical activity and training I'm going to need to do to build up to going on the hike or this very active vacation can be a good, useful goal setting activity.
Sure. And switching gears a little bit, you published a super interesting study in 2018 about lots of them, but this one in particular was about how the gut microbiome contributes to age-related changes in skeletal muscle. I feel like gut health and microbiome is such a popular topic now, but you've actually published work on it, which is great. Can you discuss what you found?
Yeah, that was one of my colleagues in Garten, who's very, very interested in the gut microbiome. And we had, with Mike, he had metabolites that were only produced by gut bacteria. So we measured a metabolomics approach. We had taken some samples of some older, measured a whole number of different metabolites in these serum samples. And what he found, interestingly, were several metabolites in these panels that could only be produced by gut bacteria. And those metabolites in these older people were related to muscle mass and muscle strength, suggesting that if they had a lot of these metabolites, they had lower mass and lower strength. So based on that, we did some work we essentially transferred the microbiome from young mice to older mice. And these were mice that were raised in a sort of a germ-free colony. So they didn't have any gut bacteria initially. So we took gut people and transferred them into the germ-free mice. And when we took young individuals, put them into an older mouse, it actually increased the older mouse's strength, suggesting that, and we looked at the gut was colonized with sort of the bacteria of the young individual. Their strength improved. That wasn't a really strong effect, but it was pretty significant, and was the first study, I think, that had sort of demonstrated this, what we're calling now this gut muscle axis. We have several ideas what's happening in the gut in aging may influence skeletal muscle. It could be some metabolites, as we showed with that metabolomic profiling. It could have to do with the fact that some of the gut-related changes in bacteria may be causing some low-grade inflammation in the systemic circulation and axon muscle. So what the real mechanism is still not clear, but I do think that there are some relationships between what's going on in our guts as we age and what's happening in our skeletal muscle. We know that there's a pretty strong influence of the gut bacteria on body fat distribution, probably some brain function, surprising that it also may affect our muscle function as well.
Super interesting. Science is incredibly cool for so many reasons, but that I think is
now
whether
we can change that, right? Whether we can change our gut microbiome and have some effects on muscle, that's something that really is an open question, and we're trying to develop some studies to maybe look at that going forward.
And if we talk about overall nutrition needs related to the older population, we've talked about how important it is to have those building blocks of protein and enough amino acids. Are there some important nutrition changes or considerations that older listeners should make, or as we age, we would want to take into consideration?
Yeah, important. First of all, when we talk about nutrition adults, I think we do a very, very poor job of overgeneralizing by saying what's nutrition for adults over the age. And first of all, I would argue that the nutritional needs and requirements for someone that's 65 to 75 are a lot different than someone who's 75 to 85 years of age. And those are also a lot different from someone who's over 85 years of age. Yet we generalize these terribly. We don't know that much about nutritional requirements for older people anyway, and we don't know very much about necessarily what they eat. And what's important, I think, about that is are individuals that are over the 85 years. And I think we know virtually nothing about what they eat. These are mostly people that live in the community. They have a lot of food insecurity issues. They have a lot of financial issues around food. They're isolated. Many of them are living alone. A lot of issues around preparing foods for one person. And when you look at nutritional diet, what you typically see is that as people get older, many of them are consuming below the estimated adequate intakes for many macro and micronutrients. And when you look at sort of some of the bad things that people eat, solid fats and added sugars, they're consuming too many of those. And there's mal and among older adults. There are a lot of physiological changes that are superimposed on that have implications for nutrition with aging individuals. One is there's very, very good data now showing that with advancing age, 40, 50, and 60. So this has an impact about what your total calorie intake can be, and whether with that reduced calorie intake, whether you can actually, in fact, eat a diet that's adequate for many of the essential micronutrients. So if your total, very, very difficult for you from food to meet all of the dietary reference intakes for many of the micronutrients, calcium, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin C, vitamin A. It's just very, very difficult to do that. So I think we have to think in younger old age, calcium, vitamin D are really important for bone and probably important for muscle health. Adequate protein intake and is important. But the other thing that's important is that probably 40 to 60% of individuals over the age of 65 now are overweight and obese. So we have this problem of excess adiposity in our early old age population. And how we correct that, how we treat that, we actually do treat that, in some cases is very much still an open question. And if we do treat it, how do we design weight loss interventions that maximize how much fat loss we achieve, but also preserve tissue? Right now, if you go on a low energy diet, if you reduce your calorie intake by 500 calories, maybe you lose 10, but probably half pounds are going to be, but the other 3.5 pounds will be muscle or lean tissue. So in an older person, that may be a good thing to have. We need to think about ways that we can design these appropriate interventions in older adults so that they can effectively lose fat but preserve muscle.
So Roger, follow up for that. So we discussed generally about nutrition, but now specifically for building muscles, are there specific amino acids that you think that are important for building muscle? And if yes, what are they?
So above and beyond complement of high branched chain amino acids appear to be pro-anabolic. So leucine, isoleucine, and valine. So foods and protein supplements that tend to be more enriched, those branched chain amino acids seem to stimulate skeletal muscle protein synthesis to a greater extent than some other high quality proteins that don't have as much of a complement of those specific amino acids. And even if you give those isolation, they seem to be able to stimulate muscle protein synthesis on their own. So yes, I think there is evidence for proteins that are enriched in the branched chain amino acids to be a bit more pro-anabolic and stimulate muscle protein synthesis to a greater extent. Whether they ultimately result in increases in muscle mass above and beyond, it depends on whether they're taken with or without size and training, what the population is that's being exercise training that they're undergoing. I think there's more positive, but I don't think all studies have been positive with regards to accrual of muscle mass.
So it sounds like that you, if I understood it correctly, it is recommended for bodybuilder that go to the gym all the day and pump iron to take that, but a normal person might not need it.
I think that's true. I think people that are really serious exercises, the evidence is stronger for the anabolic effects of the branched chain amino acids. For people like me, more recreational types, we want to make sure that we want to consume an adequate amount of protein, or they're better than eggs or lean meats. I'm not sure we really have an answer on that, for example.
And so I'm hearing a lot about strength training and basically the improving the health span of a person. So can you describe why strength training is so important to improve the health span?
Yeah, so I think important for improving health span is because in older adults in particular.
Makes sense.
Awesome. And you've shared so many awesome tips today. We might know the answer to this last question already, but is there one decision that you make each day that could be based on exercise, nutrition, or just general longevity that you can share as a tip to our listeners?
That keeps moving forward. Sometimes we feel like it moves really fast, right? But I think if we have a positive outlook on the future.
That was a surprise to me. I would imagine that you will say running.
It gives me an optimistic outlook, right? I think so it does, in a way.
Exactly. Exercise endorphins are real. I'm sure it helps. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Fielding. It was really awesome to speak with you. I've seen your picture so much over the past 8 years, so it's nice to have a conversation.
Pleasure.
And we look forward to exploring the research in the field of longevity each month with you and the leading scientists. For more information, please go to www.insidetracker.com/podcast.
Thanks for listening to Longevity by Design. Please subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Longevity by Design is powered by Inside Tracker, a personalized health optimization platform that helps people improve their lives by improving their bodies from the inside out using personalized, science-backed recommendations for nutrition, supplements, and lifestyle changes. To learn more, visit insidetracker.com/podcast.